There's a moment just before you place the key on the table when time folds in on itself. When 17 years of scraped knees, school runs, late-night calls about boys being mean, tuition checks and business loans scream through your skull all at once. And then silence. Absolute silence. That was the moment I realized I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Sarah's words weren't a slip of the tongue. They weren't nerves. They were delivered with the same smug precision she inherited from her mother. Calculated public. That toast wasn't aimed to hurt. It was designed to erase, to remind everyone who I wasn't. A toast, she said to the man who signs the checks, but will never be my real dad. I watched the room, not her. People chuckled. One of her friends whispered, "Savage," and took a sip of her spritzer. Her fiancé grinned like he'd just seen a rerun of The Office. And Leslie, my wife, her mother, tilted her head and gave the kind of amused half-smile you give when your cat knocks a glass off the counter. No gasp, no pushback, just complicity. I had paid for everything in that room. The pale lavender roses, the piano quartet humming in the corner, the overpriced wine list. Even the gold-embossed place cards were printed on my office laser printer because the wedding budget's tight, Walter. Tight, but not tight enough for a $3,000 Vera Wang dress Sarah wore just for the party, not the wedding. I didn't blink, didn't ask her to repeat herself. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, where the linen wasn't perfectly pressed anymore, and pulled out the key. It was brass, slightly scratched, and attached to a navy blue tag with white letters etched cleanly. Vault 17B. I placed it in the middle of the table, right next to the flaming creme brulee the caterer had just set down. Leonard, her grandfather, my business partner for 20 years, was sitting across from me. His hands were still mid-clap, a polite reflex he hadn't realized he'd started. I looked at him just once. "You want to read the note?" I said, his mouth opened slightly. I didn't wait. I pushed my chair back, not loudly, just enough for the legs to gently scuff the marble floor, and walked past the dessert trays, past the open bar, past the valet who greeted me by name. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't look back. Outside, the air was sharp. Late autumn had started biting at the edges of the evening. My truck was parked down the hill, deliberately far. I'd asked the valet not to bring it around unless I requested it. He thought it was some weird test of humility. No, son. I just didn't want anyone seeing the license plate when I left. The number on the plate matched the digits etched onto that key. Vault 17B. The deposit box registered under our joint business entity, LNH Future Holdings, LLC. Leslie never once asked what the H stood for. Inside that vault sat the quiet, lawful detonation of everything Sarah, Leslie, and yes, Leonard, believed was theirs. It wasn't spite. It was structure. It was the result of careful, methodical steps that had begun not months, but years earlier. And all it took to trigger it was a single public insult. One sentence. One smirk. As I drove down the hill, the party music behind me blurred into white noise. I imagined Leonard leaning forward to pick up the key. I imagined Sarah laughing about his little drama. I imagined Leslie calling me later that night, ready to offer me a chance to apologize for them. But they'd all misunderstood something fundamental. I didn't storm out. I didn't snap. I exited a transaction, and they were about to receive their receipt. He always broods when he's embarrassed, Sarah said over brunch the next morning, shoveling smoked salmon onto a bagel like it hadn't even happened. He'll be back once he realizes how ridiculous he looked walking out like that. Her mother didn't even look up from her tablet. It was childish, but Walter's harmless. He just needs attention sometimes. Men like him crave drama, Sarah added, chewing. Probably wanted everyone to chase after him. They both laughed. They were still in the afterglow of the evening, drunk on applause, validation, the kind of casual cruelty that gets passed around in rich families like heirloom china. Sarah's fiancé made a sarcastic quip about Walter probably camping in the woods like some sad little cowboy with a bruised ego. And nobody batted an eye. What they didn't notice, because they never had to, is what was missing. His usual morning email about estate balances didn't come. No refill order for Sarah's car insurance went through. The shared calendar they all ignored wiped clean. Walter didn't call, didn't text, didn't leave a note. Instead, while they clinked mimosas, he was 73 miles away. Unlocking room 4 at the Briar Lake Inn, a no-frills place where the heater rattled and the view was half-frozen reeds. He'd stayed there every year during hunting season. Always alone, always in room 4. But this time, the gun safe stayed locked. Instead of rifles, he carried a black leather briefcase. Inside, 3 folders, each one labeled in his clean architect's handwriting, not with names, but with final actions. Ms. Healy, his estate attorney, got the call just before noon. Activate 17B, he said calmly, and initiate the final timeline. She didn't ask why. She'd been preparing for this day for over 14 months. At her firm across the county, she opened a secure vault drawer, steel, fingerprint protected, signed off by a notary, and kept under dual key access. Inside were 3 updated wills, each notarized. Corporate ownership transfers for L&H Future Holdings, a letter of intent naming the next trust beneficiary, a trigger memo to 3 silent partners. These weren't knee-jerk decisions. They were time-stamped, methodically documented, and bound with red bands. Not the kind you buy in Office Max, the kind used in litigation prep. Walter had laid it all out, piece by piece, starting the day Sarah called him just a walking wallet to her friend on the back porch 2 years ago. They had been laughing over margaritas. He had been standing inside carrying her graduation photo in a frame he just picked up from the framer. He didn't even confront her then. He just began. And while the others laughed, ignored, and dismissed, Walter had been busy uncoiling the financial threads of their world, quietly, legally, and without emotion. One signature here, one amendment there, a slight name change to the holding company, an innocuous refinancing package Leslie had signed without reading, distracted by some home renovation Pinterest board. A reissue of power of attorney rights for tax purposes, she was told. She hadn't even noticed it removed her entirely. Back at the inn, Walter placed a photo frame face down on the side table. It was the same one from Sarah's graduation. He didn't pack it to reminisce. He brought it as a bookmark for the section of the will where her name used to be. Then he opened his laptop, not for emails, but for the final document, the one he drafted but never titled. He saved it as just a paycheck, and beneath that, a single line. The only thing colder than absence is indifference. Then he clicked print and slid it into the final envelope. The future wasn't coming. It had already arrived. It was July. Too hot for whiskey. Too late to pretend things were still fine. The house smelled like cedar and lemon polish. Walter had just come back from a late dinner with a supplier in town and entered through the side entrance, the one that opened into the library. He liked that door. Quiet, always overlooked. He was slipping off his shoes when he heard giggling from the patio. Glass clinked. Sarah's voice, bright, slurred, just enough, floated through the open window like smoke. "He's just a paycheck," she said. "Mom says he's too grateful to have us to ever leave." Another laugh. The friend, Maya, probably gasped. "Sarah." Sarah doubled down. "What? It's true. He acts like we're this miracle that happened to him. It's kind of sad. I mean, the guy paid off my loans and I still have no idea what his favorite food is." More laughter. It was ugly, sharp, familiar. Walter stood still, one hand still on the doorknob, the other holding the manila folder he brought back from the office. Some notes for a zoning variance hearing. It slipped slightly, hit the floor with a muted thump. The voices outside didn't notice. He didn't say a word. He didn't step out. He didn't confront her. Instead, he walked upstairs, sat at his desk, turned on the antique banker's lamp, and opened the locked drawer where he kept the original trust documentation. The same drawer Leslie had always mistaken for old utility bills. He removed a single document, the family succession trust. It had been drawn up a decade ago, back when he still believed this was his family, back when he thought love would be earned if not inherited, back when Sarah still called him Dad in public. He took a pen and began writing an amendment. Clause 19A. He drafted it slowly, precisely. Any public act of verbal derision, humiliation, or mockery, recorded, witnessed, or reasonably assumed to be intended for reputational harm committed by any direct beneficiary or dependent, shall result in immediate forfeiture of inheritance rights, both present and contingent. This clause may be activated at the sole discretion of the grantor. He didn't use legal ease for effect. He used it because he meant every syllable. No requirement of infidelity, no financial theft, no betrayal of business, just disrespect, just the casual degradation of a man who'd given everything and asked for so little they forgot he could still take back. 3 days later, he presented the amendment in a neatly stapled packet labeled Refinancing Authorization, Residence Line of Credit. Leslie had been watching home improvement videos. She signed without looking as usual, flipping through the packet while asking if he could schedule the contractors for after the wedding. He didn't reply. Instead, he watched her signature loop through the final page like a death spiral. Not hers. His. The man she thought she'd never lose because he was too grateful. She handed him back the packet and sipped her wine. "Make sure the yard crew doesn't trim the hydrangeas again. They ruined them last time." That night, Walter made a copy and filed the amendment with Miss Healy, sealed under a future trigger condition. He didn't explain at the time. The next morning, he took Sarah's graduation frame off the mantel and stored it in the attic. He didn't throw it away. He wanted to remember the exact day the illusion started cracking. He wasn't planning revenge. He was archiving betrayal. And betrayal, real betrayal, deserves preservation. Not rage, not argument. Just documentation. Cold, legal, and permanent. Leonard hadn't felt that kind of vertigo in years. Not since the heart scare back in 2008 when the cardiologist told him he was one steak dinner away from becoming a headline. But when he read the note Walter had left, simple typed and scotch-taped to the key, his pulse began to thud like a war drum in his ears. "Before you toast legacies, check who owns the vault." He reread it twice, then flipped the key over. Vault 17B. His stomach turned. Not because of the key itself. Walter and he had shared business assets for decades, but because he suddenly remembered how long ago Walter had started forming the paper shell companies. Entities with bland names, Gray Hollow Holdings, Westward Pledge LLC, harmless names that didn't ring alarms. Walter had always framed it as tax prep for retirement. Now, Leonard realized it was separation prep.
He stood up from the table, didn't speak, didn't look at Leslie, who was too busy finishing her dessert and pretending she hadn't just smirked at her husband being publicly neutered. Didn't look at Sarah, who was already retelling the toast to a group of grinning friends near the bar. He just took his coat, muttered something about a call, and left. The drive to the bank was fast, dangerously so. The roads were still wet from last night's rain, and his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He didn't even fully park, just angled into the curb outside the rear entrance, left the car running, and marched inside with the key clutched like a detonator. Vault 17B wasn't in his name, but the clerk checked the access list, saw Leonard's trustee status under the corporate umbrella, and let him in without question. The box slid out of the steel cabinet with an unnerving click, like a final door being closed. Inside were 2 documents. Just 2. But they might as well have been grenades. The first was on company letterhead, dated 6 weeks prior, a signed and notarized buyout agreement. Walter had sold his 49% stake in LNH Future Holdings to a nonprofit trust, the Delaney Fund for Children of Fallen Soldiers. Transfer complete. Funds received. No right of first refusal offered. No counter required. Leonard blinked. That's impossible. He muttered as if the paper might apologize. They had a gentleman's agreement. Unwritten, yes, but understood. Neither would sell without the other's consent. Leonard had always assumed stupidly that Walter would never walk away from the company they'd built from a concrete shell in 1994. But the name on the trust, Delaney, he didn't recognize it. Not family, not even local. The second document was a will, Walter's. Leonard knew because it was addressed in part to him. He skimmed and then stopped cold. There in black and white was the name of the new primary beneficiary, James R. Delaney. Not Leslie, not Sarah, not even one of the cousins or extended nephews. James R. Delaney. And next to that name was a photo Walter's doing, clearly a clipped passport-style image of a young man in uniform, early 20s, Army, clean-shaven, stoic. Leonard had never seen him before in his life. His vision narrowed. Sweat broke along his hairline. The marble of the bank floor felt like ice through the soles of his shoes. He sat down on the bench inside the vault hallway, just sat there holding the papers, staring at the edges of a manila envelope that had in 5 minutes bulldozed 30 years of assumptions. Walter hadn't stormed out because he was hurt. Walter had finished something, the kind of finish that can't be walked back. The kind with names filed at the county clerk's office with titles reassigned and future cash flows already rerouted. Back at the party, they were still sipping champagne, still oblivious. They thought they'd won a power struggle, but they never realized Walter had been the one holding the fuse the entire time. And now the fire was inside the walls. James Delaney had the kind of posture that said, "I don't know where this is going, but I'll listen." Polite still. The kind of quiet bred and grief reinforced by discipline. He sat across from Walter at a small breakfast table in a modest hotel conference room off Route 31. His green Class A uniform crisp despite the long drive. Walter slid the coffee toward him. Black. No sugar like your father took it. James blinked. "You knew my dad?" Walter didn't smile. "Your father dragged me out of a burning transport in the Korengal Valley, April 14th, 2005. I still don't know how he managed it. I'd taken shrapnel to the leg, couldn't move." James stiffened slightly. "I've read the report. My mom never talked much about it. She just said he died trying to do the right thing." He didn't just try. Walter said he did. He reached into his leather folder and pulled out a worn photograph. Not the one the military issued. This was taken with a disposable Kodak, edges curled, the kind of photo no algorithm would recognize. Just 2 soldiers, filthy and grinning, holding up a dented thermos like a trophy. On the back, an ink faded to gray. To Walter, you owe me lunch. James touched the corner with his thumb. That's him. I've never seen this picture. Walter nodded. He saved my life. Not metaphorically, not professionally, literally. He threw his body between me and an incoming mortar. We were waiting for a bird that never came. A long silence. Then Walter pulled out a second folder, thicker, labeled Delaney Foundation, initiation packet. He laid it flat in front of James. You never asked because you're decent, but your tuition covered. Student housing quietly prepaid. Your mom's mortgage paid off 3 years ago. James's lips parted, stunned. That was you? No. That was me honoring a promise, Walter said, tapping the photo. But this next part is different. He flipped to a notarized document titled Trustee Transfer and Beneficiary Realignment. It was signed, stamped, final. James scanned the page, blinking rapidly. This is 70% of the estate is now under your stewardship through the foundation, Walter said calmly, with you as sole executive trustee. James shook his head. I don't understand. This is your family's money, your business. Walter chuckled low and dry. No, James. It was a family's money, but not mine. I just built it. He leaned back, exhaled. I poured 20 years into people who saw me as a wallet that spoke occasionally. My wife signed every trust amendment without reading it. My stepdaughter called me just a paycheck when she thought I couldn't hear. And last night at her engagement party, which I paid for, she toasted me as a loser. James looked like he didn't know where to put his hands. Walter continued, more measured now. They were entitled to everything until they disqualified themselves. James was silent for a long beat. Then, why me? Because I believe legacy should belong to those who understand what it costs. Your father knew, you know. James opened his mouth again, but Walter held up a hand. This isn't charity. It's not guilt. It's not revenge. It's correction. He tapped the last page of the document. There are conditions, strict ones. The trust isn't for you to blow on cars and real estate. It's for impact, scholarships, recovery programs, military family support. You'll be compensated, but you'll also work. This is responsibility. James nodded slowly, still in disbelief. I don't know what to say. Walter stood, offered his hand. Start with, I accept. We'll figure out the rest. James rose and shook it, firm, steady, the way his father used to. Walter didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. Later that afternoon, in a quiet call from the hotel landline, he told Ms. Healy, Phase 3 begins now. And with that, the final descent began, not into chaos, but order. Cold, signed, notarized order. By the time Leslie would realize what had been taken from her, she wouldn't even remember when it had still been hers. Leslie always fancied herself the sharp one. She'd say things like, money doesn't hide from me, at brunch with her friends, always followed by some smug story about how she caught a billing error or got a refund out of an airline. Her confidence wasn't earned, it was inherited. Like her mother's pearls and her father's conviction that every man in her life was disposable as long as he left the checkbook. She loved the house, called it her sanctuary. She'd insisted it be put in her name during refinancing back in 2019 under the guise of protecting our assets. Walter hadn't objected. He nodded and handed her the packet already prepared. What she didn't ask, what she never thought to ask, was who held title to the land beneath it. That sliver of legal distinction was the first trapdoor.
Walter had quietly formed a holding company, Sycamore Base LLC, for years prior, registered in Delaware. No need to flag it. No family names, no obvious connections. That company, in turn, had acquired the plot under the residence via a complex but perfectly lawful land swap. On paper, the house belonged to her. But the dirt it sat on, that was his. And dirt, as it turns out, holds a lot more legal weight than drywall when you trigger a property clause embedded in a long-forgotten land lease. Walter had even used her own words to secure it. During a casual dinner 3 years ago, Leslie had bragged about her ownership of the house to their estate planner. Walter followed up a week later with a structural addendum, citing the need to protect against false ownership claims. She signed it. She always did. She was too busy posting DIY videos on how to decorate a mantle for under $100. The mortgage was next. She didn't even notice it had changed hands twice. Walter had repackaged the home loan into a boutique investment vehicle he controlled, then transferred it to a small real estate trust owned by a hunting buddy in Vermont. Leslie's payments still went through, same as always. But the deed of trust was no longer tied to any major bank. When the legal notice arrived, subtle, quiet, but final, she wouldn't even know whom to call. Utilities were the appetizer. One by one, Walter rerouted the contracts. Gas, electric, water, all terminated under Leslie's name and reissued through corporate accounts owned by Sycamore Base. He timed it so the shutoff notices would arrive just after the party weekend, right when she'd be too preoccupied with Sarah's engagement fallout to notice. The real coup de grace, though, was the business. L&H Future Holdings, the company she boasted about at dinner parties, always referring to as our firm, had been restructured in silence. Walter, using his remaining voting rights before the final trust transfer to James, had executed a clause baked into the operating agreement 6 years ago, a clause Sarah had laughed about when she found the draft. "This part's so dramatic," she'd said to her fiancé. "Any act of reputational harm to the co-founder by a named dependent shall void profit participation rights." Sounds like something out of a spy novel. He remembered that because she'd said it while testing the champagne she later toasted with. She triggered it herself in front of 50 people, recorded no less by her own event videographer. Walter didn't need a fight. He needed paperwork. The moment her flute clinked and she delivered that smug little line, "The man who signs the checks but will never be my real dad." The clause fired automatically, as if she'd pulled a lever in a machine she never bothered to understand. By Monday morning, her profit rights were zeroed, her access codes revoked. Even the laptop she used for business admin was remotely wiped. She'd try logging in that week and get an error message: access denied, account not recognized. None of it made headlines. None of it looked like revenge. It looked like order. Walter had no interest in theatrics, no grand declarations, no confrontations over wine glasses or on courthouse steps. He just moved the pieces, and by the time they realized they weren't playing the game, the board had already been folded, boxed, and quietly sold at auction. Leslie burst into Greg Alton's office with the same dramatic urgency she once reserved for spa cancellations or late Bloomingdale's deliveries. Except this time, she looked unmade. No lipstick, no pearls, just a silk blouse that hadn't seen an iron and a face blotched with foundation half wiped from tears and pacing. "Greg," she snapped as his assistant tried to stop her at the door. "I need to see the partnership agreements now." Greg didn't even rise from his desk, just looked at her over his glasses. The same pair he'd been wearing since Walter and Leslie signed their first prenup at his firm 19 years ago. His tone was flat, almost too calm. "I already pulled the files." Leslie blinked. "So then you know this is insane. He's trying to erase us. I need an injunction, a restraining order, something." Greg didn't move.
He merely turned a folder toward her, opened it to the first page. Start reading. It was her signature. Neat, practiced, undeniably hers. Then another and another, page after page of her name, looping in ink she didn't remember using next to clauses she had never read. Greg tapped one with his index finger. Section 19A, trigger clause for estate exclusion based on documented public mockery. Initial by you, twice. She blinked. I thought that was a refinancing form. You didn't ask, he said. I still locked on hers. She gritted her teeth. What about the business shares, the house, the trust? He flipped to the next section methodically like a surgeon cutting through muscle. Transfer of voting rights. Signatory Leslie Hartwell, notarized by my office. Executed without coercion. Witnessed by Diane, my assistant, who also warned you to slow down before you sign. She was being dramatic, Leslie hissed. No, Greg said calmly. She was doing her job. Leslie stood up, pacing now. Okay, but that clause, he can't just decide to cut everyone off because of a joke. Greg closed the folder. His next words came slowly, precisely, like a judge reading a verdict. You were in the room, Leslie. You heard what Sarah said. You laughed. The clause wasn't about betrayal or theft. It was about disrespect. That was the entire point. He warned you in the amendment. He built that trigger around dignity. His dignity. She tried to speak, but it came out breathless. This isn't revenge. This is permanent. Greg finished. This is permanent. She sat down hard in the leather chair, the same one Walter had sat in 5 years ago when they updated their living wills. The same chair where she'd once smirked about his state tax shields and said, "We've got everything locked down, right?" Greg waited a long moment before continuing, his voice almost gentle. You always assumed Walter needed this family more than the family needed him. That he'd never leave. That he'd always play the provider while you kept your distance. But Leslie, he was watching, for years, quietly, building a legal firewall around himself while you were busy laughing at his restraint. Her eyes brimmed now, not anger, something colder. Fear. Is there anything we can contest? She asked, desperate. Greg leaned back in his chair, folded his hands. No. You helped build the box you're now trapped in. And you sealed it. One toast, one laugh, one pin stroke at a time. Leslie stood, suddenly needing to leave but not knowing where to go. She grabbed the folder, then stopped. He really planned all this. Greg gave a slight nod, and with grace, he said, He didn't just take the money. He took the part you never thought he'd protect. She frowned. What part? His dignity, Greg said. Her legs were trembling by the time she made it to the parking lot. The heat outside hit her like a slap. She leaned on her car, not trusting her knees, while her phone buzzed uselessly in her purse. Inside were unanswered texts to Sarah, voicemails to friends, emails to vendors, all still assuming they were in control. But control? Control had walked out quietly weeks ago and taken the deed with it. The office was deliberately plain beige carpet, standard-issued chairs, no branding on the walls. A rented space in a mid-tier commercial building, neutral ground, no memories, no ownership. Just a controlled environment, sterile enough to keep emotions from boiling over. Walter had insisted on it. Leslie arrived first, her heels clicking against the tile like accusations. Sarah followed behind, glued to her phone, sunglasses still on indoors like this was some Hollywood mediation and not the unraveling of their world. She didn't even look up from the screen as they sat. Walter walked in precisely at 10 a.m., not a minute early, not a second late. He wore the same tailored gray jacket Leslie once told him made him look like someone who doesn't talk at dinner parties. It fit better now, but he wasn't alone. A young man followed, dressed in civilian clothes, but the military still clung to his spine. James's posture was a brick wall, silent, composed, and unsettling in how unaffected he seemed to be by the tension in the room. Leslie narrowed her eyes immediately. "Who is this?" Walter didn't sit. He placed a sealed manila envelope on the center of the table and said evenly, "That's who you gave everything up for." Sarah rolled her eyes. "What the hell does that mean?" James said, "Nothing." Walter didn't take the bait. Instead, he slowly pushed the envelope across the table toward them. Leslie hesitated before opening it. Some part of her already knew. Inside were 3 documents. The official 90-day eviction notice, signed and filed with the property trustee. The full pension withdrawal receipt. Every cent moved into the Delaney Family Veteran Foundation. The final transfer of business voting shares now held entirely by the trust, with James R. Delaney as acting board steward. Sarah skimmed it and let out a breathy, angry laugh. "This is a joke, right? You're giving everything to him. You've known him 5 minutes." Walter's expression didn't flicker. 17 years of loyalty got me sarcasm at an engagement party I paid for. 5 minutes with him got me silence, respect, and a handshake. Leslie's voice cracked. "We were a family." "No," Walter said quietly. "You were a cost center. I was the fool who kept paying the invoice." Sarah's tone shifted, more biting now. "So you're punishing us because I told the truth. You're not my real dad." Walter gave her a long, measured look. "Correct. And that's why I stopped acting like one." James remained quiet, still standing behind Walter like a shadow with a heartbeat. Leslie grabbed the envelope again, scanning the pension forms. "You moved it all into a charity, a foundation," Walter corrected, "with bylaws, audited accounts, and purpose, something this family hasn't had in years." Sarah barked a laugh. "And this Boy Scout is going to run it." James finally spoke, voice calm, clear. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to honor what he built, the parts you never cared to understand." Walter nodded, satisfied. "We're done here." He picked up his keys. No ceremony, no pause. Leslie's voice rose as he walked toward the door. "You're going to walk out after everything." Walter stopped in the doorway. "No shouting," he said. "Just goodbye." Then he stepped out. James followed, 1 pace behind. Inside the room, Leslie stood frozen. Sarah just sat, eyes wide, slowly realizing the weight of what had been lost. Not just the estate, not just the house, but the version of the man they had both counted on to stay silent, to stay small, to stay paying. But Walter wasn't paying anymore. He was collecting, and they had nothing left to offer. The wind at the cabin smelled like pine and old wood smoke, the kind that clung to your clothes and your thoughts. Walter stood on the porch sharpening a pocket knife when Leonard's old Buick pulled up the gravel drive. No phone call, no warning, just the man himself stepping out in a coat too formal for the woods and an expression carved from guilt and 30 years of shared memory. Walter didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped aside and let Leonard walk past him into the cabin. The inside was warm, quiet, 1 lamp lit, a fireplace going low, a bottle of rye already out on the table. Walter poured 2 fingers into each glass and handed one over like a peace offering from a man who no longer needed to make peace.
Leonard held the glass but didn't drink. His eyes wandered the room, taking in the solitude. "This is where you've been hiding." "I haven't been hiding," Walter said, just done explaining. Leonard exhaled. "I didn't know she was going to say that. I swear to you, Walter, if I had known." Walter raised a hand. "I believe you. Doesn't change anything." Leonard sat down slowly, like the weight of what he hadn't stopped was finally sitting with him. "They're blaming me now," he said. "Leslie, Sarah. They think I should have kept you on the leash, like you were some company asset, like you owed them eternal patience." Walter smirked just a little. "Well, that was the story for a while, wasn't it?" Leonard looked down into his glass. "We built that business together." Walter nodded. "We did, and we built it well. But somewhere along the line, your daughter and granddaughter decided they were born on third base because we put them there." Silence stretched between them. Leonard spoke again, quieter. "And now," Walter didn't hesitate. "Now it serves someone who knows what it means to bleed for someone else." He gestured toward the framed photo above the mantel. James's father, a man both Leonard and Walter once toasted over beers and folded flags. "You remember what loyalty used to look like?" Walter said. "What it cost. That boy's father saved my life, Leonard. Not my business, not my reputation, my life. I owed him something I couldn't repay with speeches or scholarships." Leonard drank this time. He finished the glass. He stood, shoulders heavy. "Well, it's done then." Walter didn't answer. Leonard walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "I still remember when Sarah was 6. She used to braid your shoelaces while you were on business calls. You remember that?" Walter nodded. "I do. She used to call you Daddy Walter, like it was holy." Walter said nothing. Leonard opened the door and left. Walter didn't watch him go. He simply turned back to the fire, picked up the knife again, and resumed sharpening. The blade didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to stay sharp. That night, Sarah tried calling again, 5 times. No voicemail, just rings that went unanswered, like prayers to a God who'd long since stopped listening. She even texted, "Can we please talk? I didn't mean it like that." No reply. Not because Walter was angry, because she didn't understand. Some bridges don't burn in fire. They fold quietly into dust. The knock came just after noon, sharp, deliberate, not the neighborly tap of someone returning a casserole dish. This was the knock of formality, of endings. Leslie opened the door wearing a silk robe and tension around her mouth. The holidays had been different this year. No party, no engagement talk, no word from Walter. Just silence. And now, 2 men in suits standing on her porch with expressions carved from granite. "Mrs. Hartwell?" one asked, though he already knew. She nodded. "Legal delivery. Please confirm receipt." She took the envelope without ceremony. It was heavier than it looked, cream paper sealed in wax. "Who is this from?" she asked. They didn't answer. She closed the door slowly. Sarah was sitting on the couch, still in pajamas, scrolling through wedding dress inspiration she could no longer afford. "What's that?" Leslie didn't respond right away. She walked to the kitchen, took out the same silver letter opener Walter had gifted her 5 anniversaries ago when he still gave gifts, and sliced the seal open. She unfolded the documents. The world didn't end with a bang. Just a sentence. Notice of confirmed transfer and final execution. All previously held estate assets,
including but not limited to LNH, future holdings, business shares, Sycamore-based property titles, pension fund distributions, and designated trust disbursements have been fully and irrevocably transferred to the James R. Delaney Veteran Family Fund. The date of execution, January 1st, 12:01 a.m. Leslie dropped into a chair like her strings had been cut.
Sarah peered over her shoulder. Wait, what is this? She grabbed the paper, scanning quickly. The Delaney Fund. Her voice cracked upward, sharp, childlike. That's that guy, that kid. You can't be serious. He gave everything to him. Her voice echoed through the house like a fire alarm that no one moved to silence. At the end of the hallway, Leonard stood. He had arrived unannounced that morning, carrying nothing but a thermos in the weight of knowing. He hadn't spoken much since breakfast, just watched the walls peel. Now he finally spoke. Sarah. She turned. What? His voice wasn't angry. It was tired and hollow. Tell me you didn't say that toast. She froze. Leslie turned to her daughter slowly. What toast? Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came. Leonard stepped forward. Tell me you didn't stand in front of everyone he fed, clothed, supported, and mock him. Tell me you didn't publicly laugh at the man who raised you as if you were his own. It was a joke, Sarah hissed. Everyone was laughing. It was. Leonard raised a hand. Stop. She did. He looked at her like a man mourning something long gone. Not Walter, not the estate. Her. You always thought his silence was weakness. He said it was grace. Then he turned and walked past her. No more words. No goodbye. The front door clicked shut behind him. Outside across the street, a pickup truck sat idling, engine warm, windows fogged slightly. Inside, Walter watched. Not with malice, not with joy. Just closure. He saw Leonard emerge, saw him glance once toward the house, then walk down the block without looking back. Walter waited 10 full seconds. Then he shifted into gear. No final message, no revenge speech. Just the low rumble of an engine and the silent satisfaction of a man who'd been erased and rode himself back into history by erasing the ones who tried to bury him. The estate was gone. The family was fractured. And Walter was.